So then, anyone else? So my suggestion is maybe we do the 5-minute closing statements by the panelists, incorporating any response to that. And then I'd also like to add my own request. We actually haven't, we've talked, well, mentioned the refugees, but we actually haven't spent a lot of time. So actually my request to the panelists is also in your 5-minute closing statement to also in some way talk about what, obviously, refugees need more support. What is or what should be the U.S. role that we should demand that our government do, regardless of all of the other considerations that we've been talking about today. So, and you've been really good at organizing yourselves into what order, so I'm not even going to go there.
Want to do reverse order?
Yes, that's fair.
I'm not. Well, all right. I had the last one too long, so I'll let Joe have the last word.
No, it'll be.
I'll have the
it'll be
last
Bonnie.
word.
It'll be Bonnie.
Don't be so shy.
Although I'm a lifelong opponent of U.S. imperialism, I kind of like to use, I did use the gangster analogy before, you know, that the world is dominated by two regional blocks of gangsters, a view that I think Alan has at least partially punctured. I'll have to think about this regional blocks thing, but maybe there's more gangsters than just the two main factions of gangsters. I like to use another analogy, and that's the Chicago cop analogy. Joe and I are from Chicago, so I guess we can commune on that level, especially since he's being targeted by the capitalist state.
Different wing of the capitalist state.
And that is that I believe that the police, you know, especially in a city like Chicago, are, you know, they are a part of the problem. Okay, we have capitalist inequality, you know, crisscrossed with ethnic and racial divisions. I have a lot of poverty, alienation, and frustration, and it breeds violence. Okay, and the police are, the primary responsibility is to protect capitalist private property, to protect the power structure, to enforce the dictates of the corporate ruling class, you know, and to crack down. And so I think the police are part of the problem. But if I was in a situation, if I was back in Chicago, and it happened to me a couple of times, if I was in a situation where I thought somebody was being, you know, savagely brutalized or possibly murdered, okay, terrorized, that I call 911, in spite of the nature of the capitalist police, okay? And that, in a way, is the way I see the world. Now, people who can accept that on a domestic level have a hard time getting their minds around it on an international level, because they still have this ideal about the sovereignty of nations and so on. But I really believe that the sovereignty of nations on an international level is a very vulnerable norm. You know, the big powers violate it all the time when they want to violate it. Okay, and I don't think that if we all become nonviolent and pacifists, although I think that would be a good thing, you know, anthropologically and in the long run, I think we're still in a situation where the cops rule, and I don't think American imperialism or Western imperialism is going to go away, you know, anytime soon. Okay, we could try and restrain it from in situations where it's, you know, it's doing bad things. Okay, like we did in Vietnam. Okay, we can also try and suggest that it might do a few good things. I mean, I think to a limited extent, what happened in Bosnia and Kosovo, you know, was a situation where the agenda of Western imperialism finally coincided with the need to save people, you know, from ethnic cleansing and genocide. And I don't like necessarily the way it was carried out, but I think that some good came of it. Someday, runaway climate change, resource depletion, water running out, All these things are going to combine with a structural crisis of global capitalism. The whole thing's going to come down, okay? But until that time comes, if there are situations like Bosnia, Kosovo, Rwanda, or Syria, I am a realist, a left-wing realist, and not a complete utopian, wanting everything to be settled peacefully or diplomatically when tyrant or mass murderer is marauding. I believe that has to be stopped. And unless something is done to restrain, to let Assad and his backers know that there's no military solution in Syria, unless that happens, okay, they're going to continue on their way, and there's going to be even greater bloodshed. Thank you.
I'm not sure I can do a decent job of making a coherent summary, but I'll try.
And also don't forget refugees.
I'll start with refugees then. The vast majority of the refugees are displaced people from the attacks of the government against the popular forces that started as peaceful demonstrations and maintained that for 6 months until they could no longer march, walk in the streets, demonstrate, or organize because of the repression and the killings that were done. And we've seen several million people displaced out of the country, with millions more inside the country. There is starvation going on. People are eating grass. There are no medical facilities. Whole areas are being separated out and cordoned off by the government forces that won't even allow water, food, or medical supplies in. So there's an internal problem and an external problem. Problem is far too mild a term. If we were living in those conditions, we'd be screaming. I don't at all fault them for asking for, if some of them will resort to prayers for help and others will want the United States to help them. They will want some help. And the fact is that especially, well, I don't want to overstate this, the anti-war movement, the progressive movement, the revolutionary movement, the aspiring socialists and communists and anarchists in this country, if we put all of our might together, we really couldn't change the situation ourselves. But I do agree that we owe them a debt of comradeship, no matter if they're winning or losing. I think that this is, as Alan was pointing out, this is, and everybody in this room and everybody who might watch this recognizes there is a world crisis. If you pay attention to such obscure things as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a deal in the making, where corporations from 11 different Pacific Rim countries, including the United States, Mexico, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, Malaysia, and numerous other countries, they're preparing a deal. They're trying to get, the capitalists of the world are trying to get together now that WTO was pretty much scuttled and by the mass opposition in the countries that opposed it. The capitalists of the world are finding new ways to try and advance their collective interests, even while they fight out their differences and get the governments to act as their servants and their bully boys, which is hardly new. It's a world struggle. They are planning to have courts of 3 corporate lawyers set up to judge which laws impinge on their intended profits and to be able to force governments to either pay those profits. In other words, if there's a law in Wisconsin that says water standards have to be so high and air pollution has to be kept under control, a company from Australia or wherever wanted to invest, they could say, well, the cost of doing business here is too high because your laws impede our expected profits. So either give us our expected profits or change your law. And who will decide that? A judge of 3 corporate international lawyers. That's what the world that they have in store for us and that they're working on. Since it is one world and really one fight, whatever the local manifestations might be, I agree with you, Lars. Really, the fight has to be at home. If we don't have a powerful fight at home, all the meetings in the world about foreign policy and international allies won't amount to spit. But if we don't take our time and energy to support our allies and find them, and don't support our enemies and our mass murderers like the Assad regime would be if they were in power here, but to find our friends and build connections, even if they lose, but we make connections with 500 Syrians who say they're Americans who realize that this is a world struggle, that this capitalist system, which with major powers being the imperialist powers, are our common enemies, and we have to have a common future to deal not just with the climate change, The oceans are being destroyed by acidification, the coral reefs that feed where the fish feed, and so on and so forth, to water and numerous things that we're all aware of, to the growing impoverishment, the same impoverishment that drove the Tunisian people, the Egyptian masses, the Syrian masses into the streets, that's taking place now. Of the people who are working full-time jobs, they did polls. They asked them, do you expect to be able to retire? 82% of working class people age 50 and over expect that they will work till they drop. That's growing poverty. That's class warfare. If we don't relate to that, all of this means nothing. But if we only relate to that and we don't see this as a world struggle and make connections with the Chinese who are struggling, my God, they have tens of thousands of street fights and strikes that go on every year. If we don't find our allies in this world war, we will lose even if we're successful here. If the whole world says, oh, the Americans only care about the Americans and turn their back on us when we need help, well, that won't be a very pretty picture either. So my point of view is there's a world war that's been going on for a long time. It's getting much worse. And the much worseness, the silver lining to that cloud is that people are erupting in struggle who never had any hope before. The Syrian people rose out of the inspiration of the Tunisians and the Egyptians, who overthrew their dictatorial governments in part because they had mass strikes, they had mass demonstrations, and they were no longer afraid. The fear factor was gone. And when the fear factor is gone, as those of you who've ever won anything, when the fear factor is gone, my God, the world seems a very different place. And we should support our allies and our friends. And there is a fighting force there. I think they're likely to get defeated. I think it's terrible. Those are the people who are just like us, who stood up to fight and say, no more poverty, no more repression, no more indignity of daily life. We want to have a say. We want to run this the way it will benefit us. We need to find them and support them. We need to propagandize actively against ideas that say their murderer, the Assad regime, is our ally or friend or should be defended. Just as we would say, just as they say, neither Assad nor the fundamentalists, they want freedom, they want dignity, and they want social justice. And we should be there with them. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a sign-up list for people who'd like to be part of an informational and solidarity network on this basis. And there's also one nationally that's being started. It's called MENA, Middle East, North Africa Solidarity. Okay?
It'll be at the table over here. Anybody
Yeah.
wants?
Okay. First of all, I want to just take a moment to say I was apparently prescient. I brought 30 copies of handouts of mostly my own speeches, but didn't want to waste too many trees. And I also want to say that Freedom Road Socialist Organization, our website, very small on that little handout, frso.org, and a newspaper that we publish, Fight Back News, is at fightbacknews.org. And if they run out of those handouts, there's some more on the table, and you can get it off the website as well, all those articles. So I just want to talk about a few points in concluding remarks, and then come back to what do we do. The first thing is I want to say that every war ends in negotiations. It always does. And the Syrian government has been trying to get back to the negotiating table for 2 years. It's the Free Syrian Army that has refused to go to Geneva. And now all of the political allies of the Free Syrian Army are telling them they have to go to Geneva. And they're trying to resist, but even the U.S. is telling them they have to go to Geneva. And that's a positive thing. They should go to Geneva, and they should figure out a political solution to this. That is the start of being able to address the condition of the refugees. For us, I think the only thing that we can really do to aid the refugees is to demand our government end their involvement in that war. No more weapons to fuel that war, and of course, no more threats of a bombing attack. And then I want to close and talk about, actually, Alan, I'm not pessimistic. okay, you know, pessimistic of the mind, optimistic of the will, but actually politically I'm optimistic too. Because I think the world situation in sum is this. The United States empire is in decline. In the last decade, the U.S. has had to take major steps backward because of their military defeats in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm not a vet. I did receive a nomination to the U.S. Air Force Academy in 1976, but I didn't take it. Anyway, but my dad was a soldier. Anyway, but you know, yeah, they lost. We lost in Iraq, and we're losing in Afghanistan. And more than that, economically, the nations of the world that used to have to accept corporate dictates from the U.S., they don't accept them anymore. The BRIC nations are a phenomenon that have emerged, you know, economically, but also politically. You know, there's the Shanghai Cooperation Council talking about Central Asia, and there's and actually the most significant, you know, headlines of the political independence from the U.S. have been, you know, the votes in the United Nations Security Council by Russia and China not to go along with, not to accept the U.S. War on Syria. The Russians first and the Chinese second have learned, have learned the lesson from Libya. They let the U.S. Go ahead with that, and in the vote in the Security Council for a no-fly zone, and the U.S. turned it into a bombing campaign with 50,000 sorties run against the Libyan people. So, and I just want to say too, why are we at a position that we're at in Syria? Why did the U.S. accept the peace, the diplomatic solution that Russia came up with? The U.S. had to accept that because they were so isolated on the world stage. Obama went to the G20 and came back empty-handed. Even their lapdogs in Great Britain, the UK, there's something great about it, even they couldn't support going to war in Syria. And of course, yes, the American people spoke very loudly against another war. And actually, Tom, I disagree with you. The American people don't want another war. They're tired of being lied to. They were lied to about Iraq. They don't trust the president in Syria, and that's a very positive thing. So, but even more than that, I think the reason the Russians, in part, decided to stand up to the U.S. at this point is because the Syrian government is winning. They're winning militarily. The rebels are losing, and it's not just on the battlefield. The rebels have lost any support that they've had in the country. They're really isolated politically. I think that's becoming apparent more and more to observers around the world. So I just want to say that in closing, while the U.S. is currently going to the going to the negotiations table in Geneva and has accepted this diplomatic solution, they have not given up their long-term goal. Their long-term goal is to get rid of all independent nations in the Middle East, Syria, and then next Iran. Did I go over time? Okay. Remember Don Rumsfeld, our old Attorney General? He said it after 9/11. 7 countries. We're going to take Afghanistan, then Iraq, then Somalia, then Sudan, then Libya, then Syria, then Iran. There's only 2 left. He's going after the U.S. and Obama's foreign policy is virtually identical to Bush's foreign policy. There's a few subtle differences, multilateralism. Anyway, but he's going after Syria now, and Iran will be next if they take Syria out. We have to take a stand against U.S. wars. Hands off Syria. Thank you.
I totally agree that we should stand in solidarity with the secular, democratic, moderate rebellion or freedom movement in Syria. I just don't think we do that by sending them guns. Einstein, I think, was right. He said you can not simultaneously prepare for war and prevent war. And I think it is time that we stop saying that war is the answer, because we have this long record of war not being the answer. And the U.S. has the world's largest military budget. We are the arms merchant to the world. And I think the best way we can stand in solidarity with with people rather than the governments of the world is by dealing with our own government. Jim Lawton was a contemporary of Martin Luther King, and he always used to say, I knew him from the Fellowship of Reconciliation Board, he said, some of our best lobbying is done in the streets. So I think we need to be doing that. We need to be out there. We need to be in opposition to more war. I also think, and some days I agree with you, Alan, I'm pessimistic, but I also think that the sort of disaster capitalism that Naomi Klein describes, it's not sustainable. You know, the Middle East, a lot of the Middle East wars have been for oil. Okay, we do renewables instead. We cut, you know, our consumption, and we look at a decentralized power grid. We can do that, but it takes organizing. There is, I mean, the whole issue of world poverty and poverty in this country. That's really what feeds a lot of wars. If you have nothing to lose, then you fight. And I think that we need to, when we look at the trillions of dollars, you know, that we are spending every year on the military, that's so ridiculous because we could, I keep thinking of how much oil, fair trade oil we could have bought rather than going to war in the Middle East. And I find hopefulness in the fact that there are movements of people all over the world that are saying enough already. You know, Latin America that was the first place that the U.S. mucked about and that we fought proxy wars. And now we have governments in 4 or 5 countries that are saying, no, thank you. We don't want your neoliberal policies. And so I think we need to stand in solidarity with people, but I also think that we need to realize that we don't do that by sending guns. We do that by our own actions, and we do that by standing up in this country so the rest of the world can see that there are people standing in solidarity with them. I think this being alone is really a very difficult feeling, and I think that's what a lot of us are feeling. There's nothing we can do, it's all too powerful, it's all nothing. And so what you need to do is something, you know, and I think that's different for different people. I do it by getting arrested to some extent, and singing with the Grammys and with the Solidarity Sing-Along. Whatever you decide to do, I think it is critical that we do it. And I'm heartened by, Martin Luther King has this great line, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I'm going to be on that side of things.
Thank you all
Two announcements.
again. 2 quick announcements.
One is
The benefit.
these, that's 3. I will remind you about the benefit that'll be held here in 2 weeks, Saturday, November 9th, 1 to 4 p.m., 4:30 p.m. or whatever in this room. The music performance donated by the band Mid-East by Midwest. And so please come or donate to Syrian Refugee Relief. All the funds will go to UNICEF. All the funds will go to UNICEF that are raised that day. Secondly, I show a film here every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock under the auspices of the IWW Social Action and Solidarity Committee. The film we're going to show Tuesday here is Inside Job. It's about disaster capitalism and what was behind the economic crash of 2008. So please come, it's free. Bring your friends. And lastly, the book that I was got a shipment of, The Syria Dilemma, is new, and it includes points of view favoring intervention, whether you want to call it humanitarian or not, and it also includes points of view against military intervention and what can be done in humanitarian ways and diplomatic ways. And it's available here today. It normally sells for $15 from MIT Press, but you can have it today for $10 if you want to get a copy. So, thank you.
I'm sorry, I have to make a statement for the organization that I came from, the Fox Valley Citizens for Peace and Justice in the Fox Valley of Illinois. does stand for solidarity with the freedom contingent of the Syrian Revolution, but the ideas and the examples and the arguments that I made are my own. It's not that of the organization. Okay? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much
Thank
for
you,
Yes.
coming
Diane.
again. And thank you, David, for organizing this. And don't forget to stop over there and see various things that are on the table and donate if you can.
There's also copies of Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, the best English language American magazine on covering the Middle East. They're free, or if you want to make a
I was
donation.
glad to hear you make that statement about solidarity. Struggle. All out here as if everything is in
I'd love to show it.
So I was really glad to hear.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Our speaker for today in the lunchtime series, Mauricio Garcia Villegas. Mauricio is not an unknown character in these parts. He has been with us several times over the course of many years, but he's now here as one of our two Thinker visiting professors for the semester. Mauricio probably needs no introduction, but deserves one. And I will just briefly do that. He's a doctor in political science from the Université Catholique de Louvain-la-Neuve in Belgium, with postdoctoral studies here at the UW-Madison. He's a lawyer specialized in the teaching and study of legal theory, sociology of law, and constitutional law in Colombian and international universities. From his experience as visiting professor in both France and the United States, Professor Garcia Villegas has been working on comparative sociology of law over the last few years. We've had conversations about that, in fact, over the last few years. He's also doing research on the culture of disobedience of norms in Latin America from a historical and also a sociological perspective, and that's what he's going to come and talk to us about today. Currently, he works as professor at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, as a researcher at the Centro de Estudios de Derecho, Justicia y Sociedad, de Justicia in short, and as a columnist in the Colombian journal El Espectador. His most recent books, he has several before these, are Mayoría sin Democracia, published in 2009, and Sociología y Crítica del Derecho in 2010. He's currently preparing the final version of a book on comparative sociology of law that will be published in France under the title Le Pouvoir du Droit. And I am just delighted to introduce to you Mauricio Garcia Villegas. Let's give him a warm hand.
You told me that this one was a very informal meeting.
It is
Don't
informal.
look like. Doesn't look like. Anyway, I will start by thanking Francisco Escarano and Alberto Vargas for this invitation. This has been a great opportunity for me to do things that I cannot do in Colombia, to take advantage of the library and to meet people that it's impossible for me to meet in Colombia. So I really thank you and the Tinker for this invitation. Okay, I don't know if do I need to use a microphone? Can you hear me? Is this the microphone? Microphone?
Probably a good idea to.
Is this on?
Just turning it on.
Oh.
Yes, I don't know.
There it is. This.
That way you can wear it. Is it? It's not on.
So the camera.
Well, that we leave there.
No, we're doing usually the small one you sharing.
It'll work anywhere. Yeah.
Maybe those of you in the back would come closer since.
Okay, my talk today will be about the culture of non-compliance with culture of disobedience in Latin America, which is a very old type of, a very well-known type of behavior that originated in Latin America from the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadores in the 16th century, late 15th and 16th, early 16th century. And since then, writers, thinkers, and political leaders throughout the continent have referred to this culture very often. But in spite of that, it's difficult to find in-depth studies about the culture of non-compliance with norms in Latin America. Something that is always mentioned in not only in the academic field, but in the political field, in the social field permanently. But maybe the people from economics have done some research over the last years, and I will come back to this point later. So I did some research on this subject between 2006 and 2009 in Colombia, and a book came out of this research. It was a book about Latin America, but with some specific empirical cases and empirical research on Colombian cases. And among them, I will mention some of those cases that I studied. One of them was people cutting lines in different places in Bogota and Medellin. People violating traffic rules in Bogota, in intersections in Bogota. People smuggling gasoline in the frontier between Colombia and Venezuela. Students cheating on exams in different universities in Bogota, and other cases. And what I'm doing now is expanding this research in order to publish a new book on the culture of non-compliance in Latin America. More Latin America will be a more Latin American book. As you see from this information that I just gave you, I am interested in an everyday type of disobedience. Rather than studying deviance, that is something that is common, I am interested in a non-criminal type of uncivil disobedience. There are many studies on criminal law about disobedience and on political science about civil disobedience. I'm interested in a non-civic disobedience, but at the same time non-criminal. So it's something different. This will be more clear probably as I explain what I need to explain. So I will divide my presentation in three parts. First of all, I will speak about a typology of mentalities of non-compliance with norms in Latin America. I will talk not only about legal norms, but also about social norms and even moral norms in Latin America. I mean, people disobey all types of norms in a society, but sometimes I will emphasize legal norms. So I will first of all present some this typology of non-compliant, people non-compliant with legal with norms. Then I will move to a theoretical framework from which I will try to explain this very complex typology. And then I will finish with some caveats at the end of the presentation, try to link what I'm going to say with democracy and culture and even development, economic development in Latin America. So let me start by the first point, which is this idea of non-complying with the mentalities of disobedience in Latin America. As I said before, the literature on this is very large, and there is not a specific field of studies about non-compliance with norms. If you're going to study this subject, you need to deal with people in social science, in political science, in law, in sociology. It's a very cross-disciplinary subject. But I will, in order to clarify this very complex literature, I will group the perspectives on this subject in three clusters. The first one is an economic type of explanation about disobedience in Latin America. And according to this point of view, people disobey after calculating the cost and benefits of respecting or non-respecting rules. Actors in society are seen as rational choice actors, so each one of these actors assess the situation and how its own interest is fulfilled in the two possibilities, complying and non-complying. So this is mostly the economic point of view. The second point of view is a political point of view, a political perspective, according to which people disobey when the reason why people disobey is because they try to defend themselves against an authoritarian authorities that are not fair or just, and so they use disobedience as a tool for fighting against powers, political powers, or whatever authority. And the third explanation is it's a contextual explanation according to which people disobey because they are forced to do so by exceptional circumstances, force majeure. I was trying to get the translation for fuerza mayor, and they told me that the expression is the French one. And these circumstances, this force majeure, is not contemplated in the norm. And since then, people consider that their own case is not taken into consideration, so their disobedience is considered of as justified. So each one of these visions emphasize a particular type of reason for disobedience. Interest in the case of the strategic vision or the economic vision, justice in the case of the political vision, and necessity in the case of the contextual vision. However, as I will show later on, the same person might adopt different perspectives in different cases. One person might disobey in one case by necessity, and in another case because he's fighting against the political powers. So I will put names to these three perspectives. Let me frame this in other terms. Each one of these perspectives have in mind one character, one subject, one mentality. The guy who disobeys out of interest, who is in the mind of economic perspective, is a shrewd person. The guy who disobey out of defense or in order to defend justice is a rebel, and the guy who disobey out of necessity is a legislator. I will explain how these names make sense. So let me start by the shrewd. The shrewd person is the most frequently non-complier character in Latin America. In all countries in Latin America, from Mexico to the Patagonia, we know about this personage. There is even a name for this character in Latin America that is a very specific name that only Latin Americans know, which is la viveza. And the person who practices la viveza is called el vivo. And it's very common in Latin America, as I said. But shrewdness is an ambivalent behavior. On the one hand, is praised because it means the ability to overcome difficult circumstances or to be able to overcome poverty or hunger or whatever. And to that extent, the shrewd is prized, and people defend this attitude. Most of the time in Latin America, the el vivo is opposed to the fool or to the stupid guy. And this is why most of the time in Latin America, parents encourage and promote this type of behavior in kids. For example, in my region, in Medellin, all parents and grandparents tell their kids to be vivos instead of bobos or instead of stupids. I mean, because this is a very important feature in order to succeed in our society, in our societies. Let me quote Matías Leguizamón, a Paraguayan writer, when he talks about la Guerra del Chaco, the war of the Chaco. I quote, "It was one of the most significant events in our history. We Paraguayans triumphed over an enemy that was superior in nearly every way, except for viveza, except for shrewdness at critical moments. This event showed what we are capable of doing, and it was a clear sign of the iron will of our people." So, close the quotes here. On the other hand, shrewdness could be sometimes reproachable when all means are justified to reach a goal. When shrewdness is used to rebuff or to cheat or to steal or to bribe, sometimes people criticize this type of behavior. That happens also in Latin America. But the thing is that in practice, in Latin America, the difference between these two meanings of shrewdness tends to evaporate. When a shrewd person achieves what they are after, what he's after, he gets praise rather than reproach for his conduct. One example of this is, I don't know if you remember, when Diego Maradona, the famous soccer player from Argentina, scored a goal against the British people with his hand. And he's, I mean, probably he's the most well-known and most televised play of Maradona ever. Of course, British were very particular in that context because of the Malvinas. But there are many examples in the literature and in journalism and in everyday life in Latin America that shows how when someone achieves what he wants, finally the means are forgotten, and finally this person is proud instead of. So, for example, Jorge Luis Borges once said that Argentinians used to lack moral conduct, but not intellectual conduct, meaning that they were very vivos, but the moral conduct was undermined. In the 20th century in Brazil, there was a candidate for governor in Sao Paulo named Aldemar de Barros, and his campaign, his slogan in his campaign said something like, steal but does things, roba pero hace. And he was elected. And there are I don't have time to explain all these cases, but the fact is that these two meanings, the good meaning and the bad meaning, are connected, and many times it's the prize and the meaning that wins over the other one. Yes?
How sensitive is this to perspective? If, for example, it had been an English player that had a goal by hand, would the Argentinians have valued him or castigated him?
No, I don't think they would value it.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. Is this is something that is really contextual in terms of how it affects the person that is deciding the shoulddness of it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there are other elements in this example. The fact that patriotism, and nationality, and pride, national pride, is very important in this type of games and other things. Okay, so the last thing I would like to say about the should is that this guy is a calculator. This is why economic is so important for in an economic point of view. He calculates cost and benefits, and he ends up deciding which one is better. But the fact is that in many cases he's wrong in his calculation, and there are many examples. And probably the best example is traffic rules. When everybody tried to get sooner and first to their places, and in order to do that, they cheat and cross lines and don't respect norms. They all them ended up arriving later that they would have arrived had they respected traffic rules. So sometimes the should has a rational mentality, but is very local and very limited. Sometimes because he's not able to reach or to see the whole picture, his rationality is false. It's not a good rationality. Another thing that might be important is that this perspective has been very, very important for criminal law and criminal policies in Latin America, not only in Latin America, but also in the United States. Since the idea of respecting rules is a question of balance or calculation, a good public policy is supposed to be that put incentives for compliance, and And one of the main incentives for compliance is prisons and punishments. So in criminal law, there have been over the last 20 years this idea that the best way to counteract criminality is to increase sanctions and to grow the number of prisoners, which is according to the sociology of law and criminal law, the sociology of criminal law, and not it's not a very good strategy. Not in Latin America, and neither here. So let me go to the second character, which is the rebel. Since the colonial time, rebelliousness is pervasive in Latin America. Not only it is common to find this behavior in schools, on streets, in working places, but also in some of the protagonists of the Latin American history. The gauchos in Argentina, charros in Mexico, llaneros in Venezuela, bandoleros in the northern part of Brazil, and more recently, guerrilleros in Colombia. All of them are rebels that fight legality and oppose political power. And the history of Latin America is plenty of examples about this type of behavior. Martín Fierro, for example, which is this classic in the Argentinian literature, was a policeman first, and then he was tired of fighting the bad guys, and he became a bad guy himself. But rebelliousness is not a behavior that we have in Latin America only in the left of the political spectrum. There are many rebels in the right-wing side of the political spectrum in Latin America. People from the elite or people working within the state are very often rebels, fighting against liberalism and democracy, and fighting for traditional values and religious values. There are many examples of these. The third character is the legislature, which is someone who accepts the law, at least in general terms, but claims to be affected by a force majeure that justify his non-compliance. He adopts the position of the legislature. His assessment is that if the legislature would have known about these circumstances, he would have ruled differently. So, since the legislature is not here, I will take the position of him, and I will rule the norm for my case. So, and this is also a very common behavior in Latin America. Sometimes justified. The state in Latin America is not always present everywhere. Sometimes, I'm thinking about Colombia particularly, sometimes the state is not able to enforce civil codes and legal norms in the periphery of the country. And in those places, people, there are landlords and strong guys and people from the mafia, or from the guerrilla, from whatever illegal movement who govern. So, so sometimes the idea of exception is justified. I'm only describing this type of characters from a sociological point of view. And this was a very common type of behavior during the colonial times. In that time, rules were enacted in Spain, 4,000 kilometers outside of Latin America, and people in Spain didn't know very well which were the circumstances in which those norms were going to be applied. And those sometimes norms were not very suited to the case. They were trying to regulate. And many people in Latin America, particularly officials in Latin America, decided in specific cases not to obey because the norm was wrong in specific circumstances. There is even a very well-known expression from the colonial time that says "se obedece pero no se cumple." We obey but we don't comply. Meaning that we accept the king, we accept authority, we are not rebels, but at the same time, given the circumstances under which we are, we decided that the norm is useless and we are not complying with it. So these are the three main characters, but there are two other characters that are hybrid. One is a character that is in between the shrewd and the legislature. And this character, this is someone that I will call the arrogant. So it's someone who is non-compliant because he's in a situation in which an exception to the rule should be applied, but he does this on his interest, not because this is true, but because he's a shrewd guy. He's trying to take advantage of the situation. Some people think that they should be excluded from the obligation of complying because of their status, for example, because they belong to the higher class. And this was very common in the colonial times. During the colonial time, the higher people were in the social scale, the greater his freedom. The lower one person was located in society, the lesser the freedom. The way this functioned in socio-legal terms during the colonial time was that people in higher positions had exceptions for every type of rules. What we call in Latin America fueros. How do you say fueros?
Rights.
Rights or privileges?
Privileges. Encoded in law.
Yeah, and this was very common during the feudal times. Actually, Latin America was the prolongation, the extension of the feudal times, the Spanish feudal times in other places. Spain was a very poor and isolated part of Europe when they discovered America. They came to this part of the world, and that discovery allowed them to get gold and get a big population working for them, and this allowed them to extend the type of society that they had at that moment, which was a very feudal society in Europe. So Latin America was the prolongation, the extension of feudalism during at least 3 centuries, and still in some aspects today. So the arrogant is someone who always claims always defends the idea that there is an exception for him to not obey one type of rules. And those exceptions might come from the family, social status, or religion, or honor, or many other elements that are very that are used in Latin America as exceptions for rules, for non-compliance with rules. And this is why And then the Republic